To base or not to base? That is the question. I'm Khan, and you are watching The Wrath of Minis. Bases can be anything we want them to be. We can go very simple, or we can make them as big and complicated as we possibly could imagine. Sometimes you'll find in the miniatures from like Warhammer and various other games where they'll come with a base and it'll be like this intricate, nice little piece that you gotta paint. But then the rest of your models sort of don't have anything, and you need to figure out a way to make those things come true. There are so many things out there that you could buy, if you want to buy them, that can help you accentuate, add detail, and just give a sort of place or environment to where your models are hanging out. There is so many fun things you can do, and I think it's also quite a daunting place. Hopefully I can give you some sense about what to do, where to start, how to get going, and make some cool, interesting things. But let's start with some straightforward, basic stuff. Obviously, sand and some rocks, which you could go to, you know, your local park and acquire if you needed to, for free. Having a nice mixture of various different size particles of sand and different size rocks means that you can create, just make sure that the elements on the base are different from each other. And that's nice to have because you just don't want it to be absolutely, completely uniform. And having extra cork like this in a bag, which you can chop up with a pair of pliers, is just nice to have because then you can obviously continue to add variation to your base. I also like having some slate bits, but I don't find that super useful, but you know, you can do some interesting things like this for the base of this lion here. I was like, oh, I'll stick him on some actual bits of rock. Gives it some nice weight too. Though sand, not Greek yogurt, but sand and little rocks is the staple, I actually really like getting something like these sort of textured earth stuff that you can get from AK Interactive or Vallejo. Other companies do it as well, you know, Citadel and variety of other ones, but you want them to be in a big kind of jar. Especially if you're working with like the likes of armies and things like that. Because you take these things, you can either add a little water to them, but you will, you know, apply them onto the base before you begin priming and doing any of your work. I say that, sometimes I'm doing them afterwards, but the reason why you'd want to do them ahead of time is that you don't want to mess up your paint job. So you have to be really careful if you do it the other way around rather than doing it beforehand. And there's so many different kinds out there. I mean, there's so many different kinds. You can go from like this stirred earth that looks like it's, well, stirred. You can look like just kind of like natural texture, which is cool, which is like what I would normally regularly use, but take this and then add a few rocks to it just to give it a little variety. Or we can go for snow if you want it to be like, you know, for space walls and things like that, or some other thing. Or you're in the worn-torn streets of some demolished city and they got mostly asphalt roads. So there are a variety of different kinds of these textured things that you can utilize for your miniatures. And I think this is a great way for most people. Sure, you have to spend a little bit of money, but there's not a terrible amount of money, and you don't ever really use that much on any individual miniature. So it really works for quite a lot of your minis. I think you could probably do an army in probably just one of these jars. I think that's pretty good. And you know what the thing is you could do is you could get a couple of different kinds and mix them, or make like 50% like one and 50% another. And that could be a way to play around, mess, and just do things and create more unique ground level for your minis. But say you're one of those people and you want to take it further than that. Well, there's even more stuff out there. And it really depends on how far you as a human being want to go with your miniatures. Once you start to dive into this world, this space, you can easily not get overwhelmed, which sure can happen, and it happens to me practically every day of my life, but you can get into the territory of diorama stuff. Like you can make really not expensive, though they can be too, extensive scenes. Like for instance, just in this terrain piece here, or with some of these miniatures, I've got more like plant life and stuff like that scattered throughout to give it more that sense that it's like life is going on about. So a lot of people will utilize, say, static grass, which could be a neat thing to use to give a sense of, well, grass. I do warn about static grass. It's staticky, it gets flipping everywhere sometimes if you're not careful, and it doesn't fall flat down. So what I mean by that is like grass, obviously when it goes into the ground, sticks up, and that's what you want. Static grass doesn't do that unless you have a special tool that makes the grass fall straight down. So just be aware of that. However, instead of using static grass, which oddly enough I don't use it that often, this kind of mossy like hobby spring undergrowth is really nice stuff. Just gives a nice little sort of texture of plant life kicking about. And that's quite a useful one, and a little bit goes a long way. And this could work for most things. I used it on this Kingsman model here and just painted it in a very dark color, sprayed it over, and you can't even tell what's happened there. You couldn't tell that it was this stuff. I just painted it a different color, and I wanted it to be dark. But you're like, my word, Khan, you're not doing enough. I want more things. I want more information about what I could do. Well, okay, you could buy static grass. Check out the static grass collection. So you could get these pre-made static grass like packs, and they are already pre-standing up. They're like little bushes, effectively like that. And this is a neat way of obviously adding more additional plant life to your model, rather than trying to utilize the static grass, which can get all over the place and doesn't actually stand up very well. But you're like, Khan, what about this terrain piece here with these things that are hanging out, you know? Well, that depends on how far you as a person want to go. How far do you want to go? There are plenty of companies out there that do more diorama style stuff. If you've ever thought about building a game board, which I definitely have been thinking about building a game board, or you want to create more lifelike places, or you want to do what you see on those videos that don't have anyone talking and literally it's just them assembling some amazing flipping piece of terrain or scene, and they're just putting it all together and just make it look so seamless. You're just like, you bastard. But outside of that, this kind of stuff, this diorama stuff out there could really take you so much further. And there's so many cool things from like, I don't know, what are these things? Reeds or something like that? Looks like hay or whatever it is. Chopping just a little bit of this off and adding it in place to a certain model. Oh, it gives it so much life. I did it here for this miniature. Just helps it like stand out. Different types of shrubs that exist in different sizes, which you could chop down. Additional plant life that you can just, you know, appropriately pick in the right place. And obviously, it's great when you've got a good mixture of different things, because then you can really get creative and really pick and really choose different stuff to create the right theme. Unfortunately, this type of thing definitely takes a bit of some capital to really have the options available to you to be able to work in that kind of fun way, you know? There's just no way about it. Like, I think cheaply and effectively, you can do it with these kind of textured earth stuff. Really straightforward and super simply. You can do it with sand and some rocks with different size pebbles and things like that, just so you've got like a variety. And if you want to get some like actual like plant life, probably this sort of like undergrowth kind of shrubbery stuff that's like loose, which you can glue and put it over in solid places, which I did for like this Space Marine here, which is just standing on some cork that I cut out. Sure, the base is a bit excessive, but I was just having fun and just trying something out. But I did apply different kinds of these like shrubs that were standing up with different color like flowers perhaps, and then just applied some sort of this overgrowth stuff to make it look like plant life was growing through the rocks and things. Some of the cool diorama stuff that I've got is from a company called DioramaPresepe. They are from Italy, and I ended up buying a ginormous, large mystery box, so I had no idea what I was getting, but I got a variety of stuff, and it was super cool. You know, from vines to different color trees to different types of just different types of plant life. You can see it's wherever your imagination wants to go, plus your wallet. You can do things simply, which is a great way of doing army stuff, because partly you can mix your different types of terrain mixture. Painting them differently can obviously create a different feel. Once you start to add in like your flora, and things of that nature, well, then you're really taking it on to a slightly new level, and however much you're mixing it in, and then the options just become endless, and all that you can imagine, then you are able to create. But then at that point in time, you're really shifting into sort of the diorama territory. And the question is, do you even want to go down that road? For me, I'm very interested to experiment and try and see these things. But each to their own, what will work for you might not work for me, or vice versa, some of that nature. You know what I'm saying. Let me show you some tips and some things to think about whilst you're basing so that you can do it for the future and hopefully keep things, not messy and doesn't screw things up later. Firstly, when we deal with basing material, for the most part, especially when it comes to sand and gravel and this kind of undergrowth business, we will utilize PVA glue. I can't believe I have some Games Workshop PVA glue. This is remarkable. You don't need this stuff. Don't buy it from them. Buy it from, Elmer's glue or something like that. It can be cheap. There's no one way to work when it comes to basing your miniature, but there's a couple ways that I tend to work. So I'm going to explain those. Hopefully that give you a sense about what you should do when you're doing it yourself. Firstly, when it comes to basing a miniature, I want to base it probably right now in this stage, meaning not painted. It can have the model glued, and then I can put some PVA glue around his feet and stuff like that. It won't really matter too much. And then I can get the sand mixture, put it in, knock it out, and then let it dry. Or at the same point, I could do these textured paints and things like that, and then be pretty careful because I don't really want to get it all over the model and then just get to my appropriate texture. I could do that. Or at another end, I could do it without the miniature at all. So it means I've already done the bases completely separately. Here's this screaming god armor from Kingdom Death. For this particular model, and you can see I've got a bit more of an ornate base going on. I'd just like to say how I made this. It's quite straightforward. I used cork from a wine bottle, which I cut at a strange angle, and then I glued it. So what the thing is, the model and the base were not together until literally the very end. The model was fully painted, and then I completely painted the base, and then I started adding all of this flora and different plant life material to it. And once I got to the appropriate space, then I attached them. Sometimes you just need to think about it a little bit. You need to be like, okay, how best am I going to approach doing this? Now, I would do something like that for an individual model, but this is not what I would want to do for an army, because it would just take too long and it's just too much stuff to be thinking about. So with army business, I would get to this point here. I might, depending on how you feel about it, I might do all the bases separately without gluing the miniature on first, or glue the miniatures on first and then have to be bit more careful about the actual textured paint that I'm using and apply it around the base. This stuff here works wonderfully. It kind of naturally, you don't even need, you can just add a little bit of water if you want to and mix it together. And then with a really crap paintbrush, or even with like a small metal tool, you can add it to the entire thing. If you're utilizing the sand or gravel kind of technique, then all you're going to need is some PVA glue. PVA glue is going to be your big friend here. A little bit of water mixed together allows you to get a more even surface of the model, and then you just add this gravel stuff to it by literally dipping it in, shaking off the excess, and letting it dry. Another thing that I do, I tend to do it when it's in its unprimed state. So I like to have my sand mixtures or this textured paint. I do it when they're unprimed, glue them together so they're one place, and then I will prime it. And so what I'll do with that is that means I am painting the terrain and I'm not leaving it any of the color that it originally started as. For me, that makes the most sense because this groundwork, these textures are never truly describing where the scene is of where my model actually is, and I need to paint that in. So that's how I always think about it. And that's really it. It's a really straightforward procedure. Nothing complex unless you want it to be, which is part of the fun, but obviously that's up to you. There are so many more different things out there for us to play with and work with. And so there's just a plethora of stuff. And starting somewhere is the first thing to do. sand and some rocks. And then maybe some little grass things and things like that. Maybe some textured paint type stuff to give you your ground covering. And then if you want a little bit more, you're feeling like, I'm feeling a bit adventurous, sure, try out some diorama things to really take your models to the next level. It's all up to your imagination and your wallet. And with those two things in mind, well then, the world's your oyster in diorama and whatnots. Hopefully that was helpful. I enjoy this. This is a type of area that I am more recently exploring. I'm very personally interested in doing more diorama work. It's just, I think it's cool. It can really take your miniature to the next level because we paint a model to a scene and then that scene has to be backed up by the thing that it sits in that world that we're trying to place it in. And sure, that's not everyone's mindset, but that's my mindset. And so I'm very interested in adding more of this type of thing to my miniatures. And hopefully, maybe you will too at some point. Start small, build it up. That's the way we go. And with that, I think it's time to say goodbye.